More Stories from Grandma's Attic by Arleta Richardson, illustrated by Dora. Chapter 13. What Shall We Write About? I had just finished reading a particularly intriguing story to Grandma about a wonderful secret garden and a little girl about my age. "Oh," I sighed, "I wish I could write stories like that. Wouldn't that be fun?" "Yes," Grandma replied, "it certainly would. Why don't you try it?" "Nothing exciting ever happens to me," I exclaimed. "There certainly aren't any secret gardens around here. What could I write about?" Grandma laughed. "I'm not sure that I could tell you what to write about, but I could tell you what not to write about. I almost wrote about something I shouldn't once." "Tell me, Grandma, what was it?" Grandma leaned back in her chair and dropped her sewing in her lap. We didn't have many books to read when I was young, and even in the books at school there weren't many stories just for entertainment like you have today. But once in a while we would get a newspaper or magazine that had a story in it. Sarah Jane and I would almost memorize the few there were, then we'd make up more after the story ended. Finally one day Sarah Jane said, "We ought to write these stories down, Mabel. We could probably even sell them." "Sell them?" I scoffed. "Who would buy a story we could write?" "My ma would," Sarah Jane replied, "and yours too, and my aunt, and maybe Mrs. Hobbs, and the teacher." "We still need something to write about," I said. "We don't know very much that's interesting." "We can make something up. You think about it tonight, and so will I. Then tomorrow we'll write one." I thought about it all right. I even asked Ma. "What do you like to read about?" Ma thought for a moment. "Well, I like stories about interesting things people do. And I like to read about the lives of people I've heard of. I guess I like biographies." I pondered that and decided I didn't know much about the life of anyone important. Everyday happenings on the farm didn't seem too interesting, and the lives of the people I knew were uneventful. That might have ended my writing career, except for the idea Sarah Jane came up with the next day. Before breakfast, she appeared at our door. "You're certainly out early this morning, Sarah Jane," Ma said. "Have you had your breakfast already?" "Yes, thank you. Mabel and I have something important to do this morning, so I wanted to get started right away. Is she ready yet?" "She's still dressing," Ma said. "Go on up to her room if you like, but she'll have to eat breakfast before you can go out to play." Sarah Jane burst into my room and closed the door behind her. "I've got it, Mabel. I've got it right here." "You've got what?" I asked. Since I hadn't been awake very long, I thought I had missed something. "Our story!" Sarah Jane exclaimed. "I've got our story." She pulled a leather-covered book out from under her pinafore. I stared at it stupidly. "What is it?" "It's a diary, my cousin Laura's diary. She left it here last time she visited. She hasn't said anything about it, so she probably doesn't want it anymore." "But would she want you to read it?" I asked doubtfully. "I don't think she'd like it if we wrote a story about her diary." "We wouldn't use the same names, silly, just the things that happened. And some of them are really good." I was horrified. "You mean you've read your cousin's diary?" "Well, not much," Sarah Jane confessed uncomfortably. "Just a few little things. Anyway, if she hadn't wanted anyone to read it, why didn't she take better care of it? Or at least ask us to send it to her?" I still felt it might be wrong, but Sarah Jane's argument seemed sound. And Ma had said she liked to read about things people did. Sarah Jane's cousin was a person, wasn't she? We agreed to begin our story as soon as I had finished breakfast. "What are you girls going to do today?" Ma asked. "You seem to be in a dreadful hurry to get started. Slow down, Mabel, you'll choke." "We're going to write a story," Sarah Jane replied. "A story about a young lady who lives in the city." Ma laughed. "You two don't know much about ladies who live in the city, do you?" "No," Sarah Jane said, "but we will when we finish reading her—" Sarah Jane stopped abruptly and seemed confused. Ma looked at us closely. "You're not reading someone else's letters, are you? That wouldn't be right, you know." "Oh, no," I said quickly. "We're not going to read anyone's letters." "Good," Ma replied. "I wouldn't like to think that you would pry into someone's personal affairs." Ma left the kitchen and Sarah Jane and I looked at each other. "Well, it isn't a letter," I said. "No, Sarah Jane agreed. Besides, finders keepers, losers weepers. I found it, so it belongs to me. What I do with that diary is my business. I continued to eat my breakfast. I didn't feel good about what we were going to do, but I didn't want Sarah Jane to be upset with me either. Hurry up, Mabel, Sarah Jane urged. Can't you eat any faster than that? Finally, I made up my mind. I wouldn't do something I felt was wrong, even to please my best friend. Listen, Sarah Jane, maybe the diary isn't a letter, but I don't think your cousin wrote it for anyone else to see. Do you think it would really be honest for us to read it? Sarah Jane turned the little book over in her hands. No, I guess it wouldn't. It is a personal affair, isn't it? I nodded, relieved that she had decided that way. Then a thought occurred to me. What about the stuff you've already looked at? It wasn't very interesting, Sarah Jane confessed. I saw one day and it said she washed her hair and had ice cream. I considered that news for a moment. We do more exciting things than that right here. How about the day we dressed up the pig and scared Mrs. Carter into hysterics? Sarah Jane laughed. That's right. That was more exciting. But I don't think anyone will buy that story because everyone already knows it. Maybe we should just take our dolls down to the creek and have a tea party. We might think of another story later. I agreed, and that ended our story writing career. I don't think we ever did get back to it. But we learned that an idea for a story shouldn't come from someone else's private business. End of chapter 13.